Today's episode of Beyond the Mask is presented by the insurance specialists at Bright Think Wealth Strategies. Find the disability insurance coverage that fits you best right now. Email Robert Smith at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. The show is also made possible by the team at CRNA Financial Planning. Get a free consultation today to be guided through the complexities of investing and financial planning. Just visit crnafinancialplanning.com. We'd also like to thank Helping Hands and OSA EMR for their support of the show. And don't forget, listening to our podcast can earn you Class B credits. For more information on how you can submit them, check out the CE Credit tab on our website, beyondthemaskpodcast.com. Welcome to Beyond the Mask, Innovation and Opportunities for CRNAs, with Jeremy Stanley and Sharon Pierce. We know you spend your day caring for your patient's best interests. On our show, we want to care for you. Join us as we leave the operating room and learn the latest in the CRNA industry. Beyond the Mask starts in 10, 9, 8, 7.
Welcome to Beyond the Mask. I'm Jeremy Stanley, and I've been working with CRNAs for over 23 years, and I'm married to one. And my co-host is
Sharon Pierce.
Sharon's a practicing CRNA for over 20 years, a past president of the ANA, the NCANA, and she's held many other leadership roles. As usual, our goal with every episode is to educate and enlighten CRNAs, and I think our topic today is definitely going to do that. And Sharon, what time is it?
It's time to wake up, Jeremy.
I think it is. Well, hello, Sharon.
Well, good morning, Jeremy. Look at you looking all smart in your reading glasses this morning.
Well, sometimes you reach that age, Sharon, where you need a little help. And I noticed when I went in to read the menus sometimes in a restaurant and the lights weren't real bright, that, my arms just wouldn't grow long enough. And I thought, I better get these 1.25 reading glasses, so I'm good to go on 1.25 right now. So we're good.
Oh, that's just like training wheels. You just wait.
Something to look forward to. I appreciate you. Always encourage me to look forward, Sharon. So much appreciated.
Absolutely. Face forward.
Well, we also want to say hello to our listeners this morning and welcome them to the show, because without them, we wouldn't have a show.
Amen to that.
And I'm excited again this morning for our guest, Jon Lowrance. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so stoked to be here, Jeremy and Sharon. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And
gosh, listen to these two voices. I feel like such a minority here.
Well,
I've got great voices.
Jon, I knew Jon when he was a student at Western Carolina. And you want to give a little bit of background because, I always say that you guys were my podcast mentors. First podcast I ever did was the one that you and I guess some of your cohort started up at Western Carolina. And, I'd love to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, thanks again for having me on. I'm stoked to come on your show. I've been following your show for a long time, and I'm so impressed to see what you all have done with it. And Sharon, I always enjoy hearing a true Southern voice across the airways. People up here in Maine tell me I've got a Southern voice, but it pales in comparison to what's going on. So we started initially from the head of the bed, which has transitioned into Anesthesia Guidebook when we were SRNAs at Western Carolina University. So at the time, there weren't really any active anesthesia podcasts around. And I had about a 30-minute commute into work as an ICU nurse. And I would listen to stuff from critical care and emergency medicine providers. And when it came time to pick out a project, I figured, why not create something for anesthesia providers specifically? So we were able to convince folks at Western Carolina University to let us do that. And I was joined by 3 other individuals, one of whom became my wife, Kristen. And we started from the head of the bed, and we wrote and published a paper in the AANA journal about social media and its use in nursing anesthesia education. And after graduate school, those other folks have dropped off the podcast, but it's something I've continued to do. So I'm very excited to keep producing content for the anesthesia community out there.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job at it. Jon, give us, now you and Kristen both are CRNAs.
That's correct. Yep.
And you're in Maine, so you can give us a little bit of background. And we just want to congratulate you on air for new baby boy born 5 weeks ago. And
yeah, that's right. We got a little Wilder Sky, our first baby. So breaking onto the scene. But yeah, so after school, we moved up to Portland, Maine. We are both CRNAs at the Level 1 Trauma Center in Portland, Maine. And we have an incredible community up here. And yeah, we've got our first little baby boy. So I'm rounding out some paternity leave right now before I go back to work this coming week.
Wait a minute, was that a Freudian slip there, John? You want to tell us something? Man?
My nightmares are that I have one recurring nightmare, and it's that I'm in the middle of the dream, and I've got some sort of project to do for school that I've not worked on all semester, and it's the end of the semester, and I wake up, and it takes me a couple of seconds to realize, oh yeah, I'm not in school. But anesthesia,
that was Sharon's life.
PTSD.
That was Sharon's life up until what about 2 months ago,
May.
right, Sharon?
Yeah,
2 months
back
ago.
in school again.
This May is when you finished?
Yes, I finished.
Well, congratulations. That's amazing.
Yes, it is amazing at my age. I wasn't sure if I was getting my Medicare card or my degree first.
I'm definitely impressed with CRNAs who have decades of experience that then go back for their doctorate of nursing practice degrees. So that had to be a journey for you, I'm sure.
Well, That's it, a journey.
We're gonna do a whole podcast about that, John, because it's interesting to me too. Being a numbers guy and financial guy. Because there's got to be another why, because there's not any more money involved in it. So we're going to get into Sharon's why, which will be a really interesting podcast, I guarantee you. I might even give her a little bit of wine whenever we do it, then we'll really get the truth.
Well, then you'll get the real why then. No, I'm still dragging my feet on that myself. So I graduated in 2015 with a master's degree, and I've done the math too, Jeremy. I've looked at it. It doesn't make financial sense, but I also think that there's, for me at least, there's a bit of inevitability about it. At some point, I'll get back to either a DNP or a PhD or something, but I don't know when. Especially now with a new little baby boy, like the numbers get more interesting, the time management gets more interesting, but I think in order I think to maintain relevance and a platform where people trust what you're saying, that, going back to get a doctorate at some point is significant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're doing some teaching. So I think as well, right?
That's correct. So I do teach at continuing education conferences for CRNAs. I work as our SRNA clinical coordinator at our Level 1 Trauma Center. So, of course, as most listeners will know, starting in January of this year, every nurse anesthesia program will have to have transitioned to a doctorate level training program. So I'll be working closely with doctoral students going through their anesthesia training, and then also do some work with the Simulation Center at the University of New England and their nurse anesthesia program, as well as the physician residents actually who are at Maine Medical Center, and working a little bit with simulation with them. So yeah, so I think there is a case beyond the financials for a doctorate degree for CRNAs, but it's an individual choice that you've got to look at to make that decision.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm really interested in our topic today because we're obviously on the podcast. We feel like we're doing good for the anesthesia community and the nursing community as a whole. You obviously have been doing this for a long time, and you saw this probably before almost anybody. And, now with Anesthesia Guidebook, which you do, and Beyond the Mask, which we do, we felt like it would be good for us to have some synergies on the show and talk a little bit about what you're doing, how we can advance nurse anesthesia through the podcasting that we're doing together, and, talk about some of those topics today.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent.
Well, we've got to be absolutely forthcoming. And whenever we first talked about doing Beyond the Mask, and just a little bit of background, I found out this is how my kids consumed content or podcasts. Right. I mean, I wasn't aware of podcasts. And then so we talked about it, and I found out about your podcast. So you influenced us greatly because you were already in this space before we got into the space. And so I listened to you. And so here we are.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that. It's always fascinating, I think, as I'm sure you have seen over the years that you've done this, the unexpected places that it turns up that people are listening to what you're doing and finding your shows and finding them relevant. I think that's one of the most fun and interesting things about what we do is that when you create a podcast, when you create, anything in the social media world, if it's out there for people to discover, you might put the time and energy into it, at a particular point in your life. And then if it's up there, it's going to stay there for years. And people, I still, and as I'm sure that you do, still get emails from folks that are listening to things that I put out, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And they're saying, hey, this is really impactful to me right now. And I don't even really remember what I said, but I'm putting it out there for people. So, and Sharon, you're right. I think it is interesting that, there's been this explosion of platforms and podcasts and different social media outlets for the nursing anesthesia community. And in huge ways, this is how people are learning things now. It's how people are learning about the profession. You were instrumental in talking about how CRNAs were the best kept secret in healthcare. And I think social media is helping, break down that kind of idea that, that there is this profession out there that's phenomenal and that you can get into it. And there's so many people out there, whether it's through an Instagram page, TikTok videos, YouTube channels that are helping people not only learn about the profession and how to get into the profession, but then also how to maintain a degree of competence and excellence in what they're doing. And I think, you all have this really unique voice from Beyond the Mask of not just looking at where the profession is now and where we're headed, but looking back on the history. And I think that has been so impactful for people to learn about our roots in some of the podcasts that you all have done on the history of nursing anesthesia.
Well, our organization's only been around for 90 years, and we still have people who are alive who were influential in our history. And that's one thing that we wanted to capture, and not to be morbid or anything, but when these people are gone, we still have them, their voices telling the story because they lived it.
Right. Right.
One of our biggest regrets was that we didn't get Goldie Bragman. We were supposed to be in Hawaii one year and we were going to tape her, but it was Jeremy's national meeting for financial planners. And then the next year it was COVID. And unfortunately, Goldie's now gone and we missed that opportunity to get her voice. And now we're trying to get Patrick Downey, who's one of the oldest living male presidents of the AANA, and he's been having some health issues. So we've not been able to get him yet, but it's one of our goals. And it's, just like you said, they're out there forever for people to listen to. And nobody goes to the archives. We have all this at the AANA office, but I've been in the archives, but that's only because I was AANA president. Right. Nobody else goes there, and nobody's going to read that history. But this is a perfect way to provide it. And it's kind of an interesting story how we started down that path. We were at one of the NCANA meetings, and I saw Nancy and Sandy sitting in the bar. You had to walk right by the bar to get to the meeting hall, which could be dangerous for CRNAs because sometimes you don't quite make it to the meeting hall. But I saw all these students just walking by, and Sandy kicks me every time I say this, but those students had no idea who these women were, and they just thought they were two old ladies sitting in a bar having a drink and had no idea. And they've got a whole new fan base now because all of these students that hear them on the podcast know who they are now. And take that opportunity to go up, and Nancy and Sandy are great about sharing things. And so when the students come up to them and say, we heard you on the podcast. So Jeremy and I derive a great deal of pleasure from that.
Absolutely. Oh, that's awesome. And I think what you said about, this information's in the archives at the AANA, but people don't go there to dig it up. And yet people do look at or listen to podcasts and, get on these other social media platforms. I think it is. It is a new way that people are getting information. They're hearing stories. They're learning about the history of the profession and how to become and and be functional as CRNAs right now. So it's a whole new way of communicating and sharing information. And I think these platforms have really made information so much more accessible than maybe what it was in the past.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I think that's really important is that your content, our content is open access, which I think is great for the community as a whole. And the other thing that it's kind of led to is this whole asynchronous learning type of programs. Obviously with COVID, every state association, the ANA, everyone had to go to this. And I'd love to get your take on where you think this might lead in the future.
Yeah, that's great. So we should introduce the term, this idea of free open access meducation, or medical education, which is an acronym of FOAM. And so when I was going to anesthesia school, this was just starting to get talked about in the medical literature. Blogs and podcasts for medical education were just kind of hitting the airwaves in, the 2010s, 2011 and 12. And it's interesting to think about it from a conceptual standpoint, the idea of putting information and content out there that's free and open access. And, these platforms have created accessibility. The internet has created accessibility to content. But then what's the philosophy that guides the dissemination of that content? Right. It's also obviously created huge potential for, commercial interest and profit generation. And we've seen that through various companies, who create online educational content. There's so many CRNAs out there, frankly, who are creating programs, whether it's to study for CCRN or the GRE or to help you get into anesthesia school, that are paid subscription sites. And, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's an interesting approach to, kind of a side hustle or a job or whatever it may be for you to get involved in. But I think it is really interesting to think about how free open access sharing of medical information changes the dynamic of medical education in general. Used to, the only place you could go were print journals and print textbooks and live in-person lectures provided by professors. And now, there's no shortage of information. And I think it's changing the way people actually learn information. Do you have to memorize as much content in order to be a proficient provider at your work, or can you look things up along the way? I have even listened to episodes of From the Head of the Bed to help me years down the road in clinical. I was on call. This was probably a couple of years ago. And I had maybe a 7-year-old lap appy coming in through the ER. This is like 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night. And she had sickle cell anemia. And I was like, oh gosh, sickle cell anemia. And I was like, well, good news. I've got a podcast on that. And it was a short 10 to 15 minute show that one of the other founders of From the Head of the Bed had done. And literally while I was setting up the room, I hit play on this podcast and got a super brief, reintroduction to the anesthesia considerations of sickle cell anemia. And it was super helpful. So there's I've kind of hit on so many different tangents, Jeremy. Maybe you can help steer the ship back on course.
No, I think it's good. I think that's great. It was a great concept to introduce. But as you're talking, I'm listening to you, and me not being in the profession, but knowing enough about it to kill people. I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, if someone went to a podcast and listened to this podcast, but what if that information wasn't correct? And, it just made me think of peer review and, what should the community, what kind of standards should be if you're out there promoting a podcast or giving information out there or putting information, should there be some sort of standard? Should it be peer reviewed? How would that work? And is that available? I don't even know at this point.
Well, it's a super important question, I think, both for content producers and for consumers. So for the SRNAs and the CRNAs out there, you've got to, in traditional publications, whether it's a textbook or a peer-reviewed journal, there's some sort of an editorial process, right? And we've come to trust those sources as being accurate, right, at least at the time of publication. And with social media content, whether it's a TikTok video that's explaining some sort of a pathological process or a podcast that's discussing pharmacology, really the onus, I mean, it is twofold. The content producer needs to be careful that they're bringing accurate information to their audience, but there's no one checking them on that. I mean, it is so easy to produce a podcast and get it out on the airwaves, and you can say whatever you want. It does not have to be accurate, and no one's going, kind
of like being a politician, right?
What's that?
It's kind of like being a politician, right?
It is. Yeah, right.
I mean, you say whatever you want. You can always retract it later,
Exactly. And now you don't even have to retract it.
You just live with it,
your way through
and keep building on it.
Right. Which, the politics of saying whatever you want, it just doesn't work when, lives are at stake and clinicians have to take care of patients. So there is this onus on content producers of being accurate, but more so than ever, especially, specifically compared to textbooks and peer-reviewed journal articles. Listeners or consumers of social media, CRNAs and SRNAs and other anesthesia providers have to discern the accuracy and the applicability of what they're hearing. And it really brings in this question of how do you do that? And should there be a process of peer review or editorial review in podcasts? And there are, that has been suggested in the literature. There are people who have tried to do that. And one of the beautiful things about social media is that the immediacy with which you can get information out there. And I do think the more time spent, editing and peer reviewing and making sure everything is super, dialed in and specific and perfectly accurate, it may slow it down. It may make information less interesting. And I'm not saying that, inaccurate information is more interesting. That's not what I'm saying at all. But
it usually is.
Well, as we can see the clarity of certain Twitter accounts the last several years in the United States. So that's a whole nother ball game. So I think the question of quality control is very interesting. And the immediacy of spreading information is so interesting too. It's been said that if you want to know the state of information 5 to 7 years ago, read the latest edition of whatever textbook is on the market. If you want to know what was going on 2 to 3 years ago, the latest cutting edge information, but 2 to 3 years ago, read the latest peer-reviewed journal article. And if you want to know what's actually happening right now, you've got to consume social media. You've got to get on and see. And it's not just about trends, but evolutions in techniques and, changes in pharmacology, changes in medications, changes in medical technology. Those things are being discussed on social media. And I do think that COVID, as Jeremy, as you said earlier, has accelerated this process. Slowly, if you look at the history of foam, and I can send you some journal articles, some peer-reviewed journal articles that talk about foam from a conceptual standpoint and kind of outline the history. But if you look at the history of it, these traditional peer-reviewed platforms have caught on. They have seen the power of social media, whether it's podcasts, blogs, et cetera. And they have shifted and tried to make their information, more congruent with the evolution of technology. And, but I think that has brought about the idea of peer-reviewed journal articles not limiting their scope of publication to what they can fit in a print journal, right?
Right.
What was interesting with our publication on social media nurse anesthesia education was that we did a lit review while we were in grad school. That transpired 2013, 2014. So all the articles we were looking at were published a couple of years before that. And then, we submitted our article in 2015. It had to go through a period of, revision. We had to revise the article. And then by the time it was accepted for publication, it didn't come out into print for another 2 years in February of 2017. So you're looking at something that's talking about this evolution of content, of how quickly social media can produce something. And even that peer-reviewed journal article, it took 2 years, probably 2 years to produce, and then 2 years to just literally sit on the shelf before it found its space in a print journal article. So I think traditional journals are looking at, how do we push stuff online to get information out there more quickly? So there's all kinds of variables, whether it's journals who are adapting to the pace of social media. And then as we were just talking about, some sort of quality control and accuracy of content from producers who are actually producing things on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
Well, I know you've talked about it on your podcast before about when you're putting out information, it's clinically relevant at that time. And how do you deal with it that somebody may be going back and listening to that content 3 years down the road?
Right.
And, I guess time stamping it. And we're not really good on our podcast. We may tape it, but it might not air until 3 months down the road, and doing some time stamping. But I will tell you, we don't do as much clinical content. And again, that was because of you, Jon, because I listened to your podcast and your clinical content was excellent. And we didn't feel like that needed to be a space that we were in. Number one, Jeremy don't know anything about the clinical.
Now, I do know a little bit. I know intubate, extubate, ambu bag. I mean, there's a few things I know.
Yeah,
okay?
I heard you answering some Apex questions on your latest show.
Hey, there you go. Look at this.
You've been working on your CRNA merit badge.
I'm very good at deductive reasoning. I'm a very good test taker. So, I can, but yes, as I said earlier, I would kill people. So that is not my forte. So.
But that wasn't a space that we felt needed to be covered, nor did we feel like that was a space that either of us, really could be in. I mean, I'm a clinician to be sure, but I already know how to give anesthesia, hopefully 30 years down the road. And it's my jam is somewhere else, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But you just do such an excellent job. And actually, that's the reason why I listen to you, is to
Thank
get
you so much.
clinical content. You've got a great voice that I love to listen to.
Thank you. I do think you bring up a really interesting point, which is, we're seeing that as more and more people create a platform from which they want to share information, is what's the point behind what you're doing? What particular angle do you want to have? What's the space that you want to fill in the content that you want to talk about? And I have heard from other social media, kind of content producers in the anesthesia space, that they'll steer away from clinical information because they say, in order for that to be accurate and for it to be well done, I would have to put a lot of time and effort into reading and making sure that things are high quality. And that's, it's good for them to recognize that that's an element of the whole process, but it also shapes what people are doing, right? It shapes what people want to talk about and how they get into that space. And, I don't think that I still feel like we're just getting started in this whole space. That, for SRNAs out there who are listening, if you've got something to say, or if there's an angle that you want to take, it's not all been done. There's a space for the next wave of content producers and, to come into social media and to, create content, or the next podcast or whatever it might be. I look at where I started with From the Head of the Bed, and I thought I would be able to cover everything, and when you look at the amount of time it takes to actually produce something, and I'm still super, analog and archaic, and am doing all of my own editing and that kind of stuff. So it does take a lot of time to, get a topic pulled together, get an interview pulled together, edit the information, create the website, all of that kind of stuff, that you're not able to cover everything. And there's so many different people out there who are taking different angles at content and doing a really good job with it. And it's been very impressive to see the evolution.
I read something, Jon, you probably know a lot more about this than I do, but the average person that starts a podcast, I think 80% of them don't make it past their 7th episode.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, it is hard, and you do have to have a vision. We do a weekly release, and we've always done that for 3+ years now. And sometimes it's hard for Sharon and I to get together or to think of a topic that we might want to have on, because Sharon's really great at that, putting these lists together for us that are, forward thinking of who we're going to have on and coordinating that. And, I couldn't do it without her. I mean, seriously. I mean, again,
that's awesome.
We're a good team in that regards, but you've been doing this for a long time, and you've consistently been doing it and putting out that content and still doing it. So, as I kind of look at this and think back through it, there are folks out there that have anesthesia-related podcasts that, like you said, are charging for that. And then there's people like us that have open access where, the content is free. What is your thoughts on the charging side of it? And I just go back to, the fact that if you're giving advice through a podcast and you're charging people money for it, what are your responsibilities? What should you be doing? How should that content be verified? And again, these are our opinions. I mean, it's I'm not looking for, an exact, but I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I think that obviously so many people get into producing, you threw out the term earlier, asynchronous learning opportunities, again, which means most basically like you're not sitting in a classroom getting it directly from a presenter, or you're not at a conference hearing it directly from a live presentation, but it's some sort of a pre-recorded content that's put out there. So it's asynchronous. It was recorded at one point, you're consuming it down the road. So many people get into producing those styles of things, whether it's a YouTube video, there's all the social media platforms in terms of Facebook pages, TikTok videos, that kind of stuff. And then podcasts and blogs, and then also, things that are definitively behind a paywall, stuff like Apex or Prodigy, educational platforms that you're not going to access unless you pay for that access of content. And now I think that there's a new wave of people who are offering, support for critical care nurses to get to anesthesia school. So support, coaching services, whether it's reviewing applications, personal statements, providing tutoring services, those kinds of things. So, you can't look at paid content and say, this is philosophically wrong.
Right.
It's out there. People can do that. It can be a very lucrative income stream for some individuals. But that also brings up the question of what's your motivation? What's the goal? What's your output? What's your responsibility? What are people getting from you for the price that they pay? And for me, I think the philosophy of free open access content has always been so inspiring that, you have people that are willing to share information freely. For instance, I'm doing a writing course right now that was actually recommended by one of the other anesthesia podcast providers. It's called Writing in the Sciences from Stanford University. And it's a whole, multi-week pre-recorded video lecture series on how to write professionally, how to write for scientific journals. And it's offered for free from Stanford University. It's an excellent example of free open access medical education or writing education.
Oh, Lord, tell me about this. Even though I just graduated, that was one of
Sharon, you're done. You're done.
I know.
No more school.
It was so difficult.
Don't stop going back to school, Sharon.
My advisor would say, yes, Sharon, you need to take that. I'm used to writing one-pagers for politicians on a 7th grade reading level.
Right.
And to go to writing, my manuscript that's 240 pages.
Right.
That was a big leap for me.
It's a huge leap. And a lot of healthcare professionals, beyond CRNAs, you're scientists, you're healthcare providers, you're practitioners. You don't come or really think about needing to develop writing skills to be able to do your job. So, but we can provide a link. I'll send you the info for that so you can put it up.
Oh, that would be great for me.
But to Jeremy's question, I think it goes back to, from a content producer standpoint, what is your goal? What's the incentive for doing what you're doing? And I think, too many content producers, whether it's, people on Instagram or TikTok or those who are doing podcasts, they have kind of their own incentives for doing what they do, whether it's popularity, notoriety. So, the number of downloads, the number of likes you get on an Instagram post or a TikTok page, or it's income. How much profit can you get directly from consumers through paid subscription services or through advertisers that may, put banners on your website. And while each of those things can be super reasonable and even help you make what you're doing possible, because for those who have no income stream associated with what they're doing, which I am in that category, I've never sought to monetize what I'm doing with the podcast. It's a big ask in terms of, volunteerism. But for me, it's a way that I give back to the community. The time that I put in is a way to give back. And I don't necessarily need a financial incentive because of that. And I've looked at different outlets, and there may be things that come down the road that tie in some sort of a financial incentive for it. But you also have to be very careful about how you approach that. And maybe a paid subscription, process is a way to maintain the integrity of your platform, because there's the whole other realm of advertisements or paid sponsorships through industry partners. So, and that can influence, the integrity of your content. If you're on there talking about Sugamidex, and how great it is, but the maker of Sugamenix is funding your show, that's a direct conflict of interest.
Exactly.
And there's not, again, you can say whatever you want on a podcast and you don't have to disclose conflicts of interest in whatever you're producing. But I think, the integrity of what you're doing is important. And I think the philosophers of social media would say that social media will police itself, right? That if you're out there and you're doing something that is, unethical, that hopefully the community would learn about that and sort of, marginalize or publicize what you're doing and make that known. But for me, I think, for Anesthesia Guidebook and what I'm doing, to me, the goal is not, how popular this can be or how many likes I get or how much money I can make. It's really about helping equip providers to be better at their jobs. And so for me, it's not been, I know that there's algorithms out there that, the algorithm will promote your show if you do a weekly release. The algorithm on Instagram will kick you to more, Instagram users if you're posting daily and if you use all of their little social media tools and videos and that kind of stuff. But to me, it's never been about like how much it can be seen, but how well I can produce the content and if it's relevant and helpful to other people. The point is not, to become popular or well-known, but the point is to equip people to do their jobs better. And, so like if you think about it from like the old, hero story, the hero of the story, I think so many content producers see themselves as the hero of the story. It's about how popular they can get. And for me, the hero of the story is the CRNA out there who has to go to work every day and is facing these challenges of how to take care of patients in really complex environments, or how to navigate the business and politics of healthcare, or how to maintain a sense of personal wellness. And if I can create content that helps them succeed in those endeavors, then they're able to win the day. Then they're able to do their jobs better. And that's rewarding enough for me if I can be a small part of what helps them succeed.
As a CRNA, you spend years preparing yourself for this career, so we don't want to see you lose out on any of the income you've worked so hard to earn. The best way to protect yourself and give you the confidence that a major life event won't disrupt your financial future is through disability insurance. We've known disability income specialist Robert Smith for many years and have seen the work he's done with nearly 2,000 CRNAs over multiple decades. He can help identify any gaps in your existing coverage and fill those gaps by finding the best value on a policy. Contact Robert and let him know you heard about him on our podcast. Send him an email at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. That's rsmithjr@financialguide.com. Or call him at 504-394-6557. Protect your greatest asset as a CRNA, yourself and your ability to earn a living by adding disability insurance to your financial plan.
Well, John, one of the reasonings that we started the historical series was, to Sharon's point earlier, is SRNAs aren't learning as much about the historical aspect of being a CRNA.
Well, it was taken out of the curriculum. There were even questions on our test about our history, and that was taken out. So they don't teach it anymore because it's not on the test.
Wow. Right. I didn't realize that.
I think, Sharon, aren't they putting a little bit back in now from what I understand? I mean, not a lot, but a little bit.
I mean, it can be taught in professional aspects, but I mean, we know for certain that people are not aware, just like, I'll throw this example out, this whole region director realignment resolution that just came in. Whenever it started, the makers of the resolution, I asked them, did they go back? And this is not the first time this had been discussed. And there was a huge task force that Deb Geisler, an AANA past president, headed up. And I got in touch with the makers of the resolution to say, have you read that task force report? They didn't even know it existed. And I was told by one of the makers, Oh, well, that happened when Purple Rain and Prince was popular. And I said, you know what? I went to that concert, and every time I hear it on the radio, I'll text him and say, "Hey, Purple Rain's on the radio." But they never went back and looked at that. And that's another reason why I think that the history piece is absolutely important. How do you know where you're going? I mean, I understand that the windshield, you can see more, but you still have a rear view mirror for a reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you're bringing forward the history is so important. And then also, as you said, Sharon, just, that example reminds me of, I think maybe, I don't know, it was a year or two ago, you all were doing, episodes to explain different platforms going on within the nurse anesthesia community. So addressing the change in terminology from nurse anesthetist to nurse anesthesiologist, or nurse anesthesiology for the name of the association. And I think, again, people are probably not going to spend as much time reading an email or logging on to a password protected member site of the association to read through agendas and proposals, but they will click on a podcast and listen to content that's being currently discussed on their commute to work or while they're running or working out or whatever. So again, the accessibility of information is so valuable on these platforms. Well,
speaking of, do you think that we've become more auditory learners? I know.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I became an auditory learner whenever I was in anesthesia school, just because I had to. I had 3 children under the age of 5 whenever I went to anesthesia school. And I used to tape on a little tape recorder every single class and just listen to it over and over because I couldn't sit down. So traditionally, especially women are not great auditory learners, but I transition. And I think that's the reason why I really like the podcasting piece. But do you think as a whole that people are transitioning more to learning in that method?
It's so interesting to think about that question and kind of the ripple effects and or the other layers of that. How has social media changed the way that we consume information, the way that we look up information? What's the influence of the algorithm on everything that we do, right? From
the Social Dilemma, that movie.
Yeah, that's right.
Freaked me out.
It's super scary. So, I think it's from a theoretical standpoint, people still learn in discrete ways, whether it's reading, auditory, visual, kinesthetic, which is why clinical rotations and anesthesia training programs are so powerful, right? It's a mentored, precepted, experiential learning opportunity, which is why the art and science of precepting in clinical education is such a huge passion of mine, and why I talk about it a lot on Anesthesia Guidebook, is that, we are not trained to be clinical educators during anesthesia school. As you said, they're even, slicing or reducing or eliminating the content on history. From anesthesia training programs, there's so much information that we have to get across for CRNAs to be competent and proficient at their jobs, that these other elements, whether it's the business of anesthesia, the history of anesthesia, how to become a clinical educator and preceptor, you don't often find those things in traditional nurse anesthesia training programs. And so CRNAs have to learn those skills elsewhere, which is fascinating. But to your point, I think that social media has really changed how we consume information. My wife, her Instagram accounts have been taken over with baby feeds. It's everything about babies, videos about breastfeeding and changing diapers and sleep schedules and stuff. And we were sitting on the couch last night. She showed me this video. It was so fascinating. It was like on a reel on Instagram, which is a short, like TikTok style video where it gives you information. And this woman wanted to say something about, I can't remember what it was about, whether breastfeeding or sleep schedule, but even the video was in like 2 times speed on the audio. Like she sped up her audio content. It was like, I want to tell you about breastfeeding. This is really important. Look at this. It was so fast to grab your attention and to hold you. She obviously didn't speak that fast when she recorded it, but she sped it up for the playback, because I think our attention span has shrunk because we're so used to swiping. I was reading a blog by the guys that were created the minimalist content and books and videos and all that kind of stuff the other day. And he said one of his lessons was that that he's learned in his life is, scrolling is the new cigarette smoking. That people, smoking is like taboo, but now what we do to pass the time is just scroll, whether we're in the grocery store or whatever. And I think that rapid scrolling, I mean, we're now shaping videos in like double speed to get the information in as fast as we can. And I think that also creates problems, especially if you're looking at, like you said, if you're getting your primary information from social media content, maybe you're not getting enough, right? You need to go to a textbook and actually read and dig deeper and look at the journal articles and cite the literature and dig into the why behind the things that we're talking about on social media. And if you're just listening to, YouTube videos, podcasts, blogs, that kind of stuff, you're missing so much information, I think, as an SRNA at this point when it comes to clinical information and info about the profession.
Yeah, no, I think this is all really good stuff, Jon, and it is interesting how the industry is changing so quickly. I always look out and say, what's next? But I feel like with podcasts, we're really just scratching the surface of the use of this because people do want that information. They want it now. And they're searching for ways. So, although podcasts have been around for a long time, I think we're going to see them continue to play a role in education and just consuming of information out there. So, you do a great job, like Sharon said, the clinical stuff. I've listened to your podcast some, and some of it I get, some of it I don't. I did listen to the one with Eric.
Eric Carlson,
where he talked about
Eric served on my board whenever I was president of the North Carolina Association of Nurse Anesthetists back in 2001 to 2002. Good Lord, that's 20 years ago.
He's an amazing guy.
He is an awesome guy.
About using your financial services, Jeremy, CRNA financial planning, on a show that I did with him on retirement, which was great.
His wife is very cool too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're great people. But, as we kind of wrap this one up, Jon, first we want to thank you. I personally want to thank you for all your leadership in this space. And really you have been, and, Anesthesia Guidebook and everything you've done, you've kind of been a roadmap for what Sharon and I have done. And that's really what we're trying to be. We've had a little bit of success doing this, and we want to give back. We want to give back to other folks out there who are doing podcasts and promoting good works out there and helping out the CRNA and nursing community. And, our idea, this is actually Sharon's idea, I give her all the credit, is to have other folks on who have podcast related and see if we can increase, their visibility, and hopefully we get a few more visibility increases as well. So this is definitely her.
Today's show is brought to you by the folks at CRNA Financial Planning, an independent consulting firm that offers financial planning services exclusively to CRNAs and their families. From planning for a child's future college expenses to building a predictable income stream in retirement, the firm is committed to offering you comprehensive financial services, customized to fit your unique needs and objectives. If you have questions about your financial future, get them answered. Call the team at 855-304-3748. That's 855-304-3748. Or go online to crnafinancialplanning.com.
But as we conclude, anything you want to conclude on here?
Well, I just want to say thanks again for having me on. I mean, you all, we've talked so much about, quality control in our conversation. And I think, you all have built a really high quality podcast. You've put the time in, you've put the energy in, you've gone to the sources, you've tracked down the people who maybe have never heard of a podcast, some of the old timers in anesthesia, and have interviewed them and captured their stories. And you all have just consistently put out really, really high quality content. And I think that's why you have created such a substantial platform to speak from. And I'm just so grateful for what you all are doing, and also stoked about where you're headed in terms of being able to give back through the platform and educate other folks. So thank you. Thank you for keeping your podcast free and open for other folks. I think that's really meaningful for the SRNAs and the CRNAs out there. And I think, as we look forward to the future, we are just getting started with this whole process. And I think that social media and asynchronous learning opportunities will continue to change the shape of nurse anesthesia education for years to come. We don't have time, and we haven't even scratched the surface of, the role of programs like Apex and Prodigy and, conferences, whether it's board prep conferences or continuing education conferences for CRNAs, how those are influencing traditional university-based training programs, the whole concept of accreditation, again, in quality control, and, whether it's reasonable for universities to require SRNAs to purchase these third-party training programs. But again, recognizing that there's value. If everyone out there is trying to reinvent the wheel, if there's 15 different podcasts on succinylcholine or ketamine or a ventilator check, how do you differentiate which one to listen to? And maybe is there a space for, the AANA or some other organization to step in and curate content producers to try to pull people together from a synergistic standpoint and get information that is peer reviewed, that is quality checked, and that remains free and open access, that can shape the future of anesthesia education, with the end goal of, can we better equip CRNAs to be the clinical experts that they are, but on an ongoing basis with up-to-date information. So we're just getting started, and it's a fascinating field. And I would encourage, the SRNAs who are listening and the CRNAs out there, if you've got an inkling to get in on the show, reach out to the podcast that you're stoked about, see if you can help out, see if you can help contribute a show. Or if you want to go big, there are ways to create your own platform as well, whether that's a TikTok page or a podcast or some other social media outlet. So, but thank you again for having me on. I'm so stoked to be here with you.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners, Jon's podcast is Anesthesia Guidebook. If you haven't listened to it, obviously go out there, check him out. As you can tell, he's a great guy and he's doing great works and for the right reasonings. So, Sharon, you want to introduce our lightning round?
This is my favorite part. So, Jon, what do people often get wrong about you?
Oh, goodness. I don't know. I've got a big beard and a sleeve of tattoos. So maybe they think I'm a hammer and not a hugger. I'm a hugger, though.
I love it. That was good. So, Jon, what's your favorite word?
Well, I've been accused of using the word stoke far too often on my podcast. So maybe that's it. But there's a reason. It goes back to just, it is that California, Hawaii surfer culture of just finding what you're passionate about. And to me, podcasting and sharing meaningful stories for other people is something to get stoked about. And so I use that a lot, but I mean the core of that word every time I say it.
So if you could go back in history, what era would you go to?
Ooh, I don't know. That is so difficult. I mean, there's so many things, My wife watched Outlander recently.
Oh my God. No wonder y'all got a baby.
Hey.
I haven't seen that one. Do I need to check it out? Is that what you're telling me?
Oh my God.
To be a super nerd, I think going back to when anesthesia was still just some of the areas were just evolving. Ed Eager is one of my heroes in anesthesia, the guy that developed MAC, the concept of minimum alveolar concentration of volatile anesthetics. I mean, to go back to a time where, these things weren't a given, that you didn't just, turn the dial on and your patient's asleep on the anesthesia machine with sevoflurane, but, people actually had to sit down and hammer out that science and figure out how are we going to do anesthesia better. So, standing in the lab with Ed Eager and picking his brain as he's developing volatile anesthetics, that would be pretty cool. But that's the nerdy anesthesia version. There's so many eras to go back for so many different reasons.
Well, see, there you go. People would if they see you with your Grizzly Adams beard and your sleeved arm, and yet you want to go back in time to be in a lab with.
But it is super so funny, though. You say that, but people do perceive things about people. But Jon, once you open your mouth, they realize really quickly that this guy's highly intelligent, smart, and personable.
Oh, so, goodness, Jeremy. You're
absolutely.
It is true. It is true. So, all right, last question. And, I got to go here. If you won the lottery, what would you do, Jon?
Ooh. Well, since I'm speaking to a CRNA financial planner,
Good point.
I might actually sign up for your services finally. No, but I mean, I would think most people are familiar with the reality that people who win the lottery end up broker than they were before they won the lottery. So I would try to apply the best financial sense, eliminate personal debts, look at ways to give back to other people, look at ways to set up that windfall of cash to where it continues to replicate itself through, sound investments. So, why take a windfall of cash and go buy fancy things that are gone, in a flash when you can set up, harness the power of that in order to create so many other good things. I've come to know someone recently who is an incredibly generous philanthropist, and she gives out of her earnings on her investments. She gives tens of thousands of dollars away to all kinds of things that interest her, but it's all based upon the earnings from her investment. She very rarely gives earned money or principal value away. Yeah. And it's through sound financial investing. So I would you would be the first guy to call, Jeremy, if I won the lottery, and we would put that money to good use.
Well, that's a great answer. What a great answer. I'll tell you. Well, Jon, again, thank you and congratulations to you and Kristen on, and what's your little boy's name?
Wilder Sky.
Wilder Sky.
S-K-Y or S-K-Y-E?
You can't blame him if he grows up just wild and crazy.
He's going to move to Montana. That's
right.
That's what's going to happen.
That's right. He's going to break some hearts growing up.
Well, with two good-looking parents like you two, he's going to have to. So,
yeah.
All right, Sharon. Well, I think that's a wrap. It's been a great show.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Jon.
We want to thank our listeners for listening to Beyond the Mask with Jeremy Stanley and
Sharon Pierce.
If you like our show, Sharon, what's the single best way to help the show grow?
The single best way? Oh, we've got so many ways. Tell your friends, like us, subscribe to us, put us on social media. The list is long. Show us some love.
That's right. We're in the top 50 medical podcasts, and our goal is to be in the
top 10 and on the way to
number 1. Until next time.
It's a wrap.
Have you thought about what would happen if you weren't able to work for 2 or 3 years? On average, 25% of people will file a disability claim, and most of us aren't prepared for that loss of income. Every CRNA needs to protect their biggest asset, yourself, and your ability to earn with a disability insurance policy. We recommend contacting Robert Smith, a master disability insurance specialist with more than 30 years of experience and 1,800 CRNA clients, to find the coverage that fits you best. The best way to do that is to send him an email at rsmithjr@financialguide.com. That's rsmithjr@financialguide.com. Or call him at 504-394-6557. Beyond the Mask is made possible by the team at CRNA Financial Planning. With almost 2 decades of experience, the firm guides CRNAs through the complexities of investing and financial planning. Schedule a free consultation today by calling 855-304-3748 or go online to crnafinancialplanning.com.
Hi, this is Jackie Rolls, President of the International Federation of Nurse Anesthetists and President and founder of Our Hearts, Your Hands, a global anesthesia support community that takes donations to allow nurse anesthetists in low and middle income countries to go to educational programs, to buy equipment or textbooks. Your donations are tax deductible, and we would appreciate your support.
OSA EMR is a free anesthesia EMR developed by CRNAs that you can download and use on an iPad. Our nonprofit mission is to make sure that solo and small practice CRNAs can digitally record their anesthetics. To learn more, visit osaemr.com to download and consider donating to our cause. Remember, for CRNAs, data is destiny.
Be sure to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and anywhere you like to listen to shows. Also be sure to check out BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. Each episode is posted there with a corresponding blog post, and we timestamp important parts of the episode to help you quickly get to the content you're looking for. Also check out the special series section on the site. You can follow along and catch up on the CRNA History Series, episodes specifically about political conversations in the industry. Or try the CRNA Personal Finance Series. It's all on BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. And if you have a question for the show or want to be a guest, or even suggest a particular topic, fill out the contact form on the site or send an email directly to us at info@BeyondTheMaskPodcast.com. And lastly, let's take the conversation social. Check out our Beyond the Mask podcast Facebook page and Facebook group.